Okay, we're getting ready to move on to the next. And I think we all know that, and I've told the story that I invited Bonnie to come down to this event, and to my surprise, she agreed to do that. And but Tony knows her a lot better than I do, so he's going to give you a little more introduction, Bonnie, and then we'll let you get going. So, Tony.
Sure you can.
This is before the introduction. So last night, I walked around the corner. I was just taking a walk, looking around, and all of a sudden I heard my name called. And I don't know, you're in the audience, I know you are, but several people were in a car, and they rolled down the windows and yelled, "Hi, Bonnie, hi, Bonnie." And I thought, I don't need an introduction. Tony, sit down.
Oh, you're bad. She's always been like this. She's so humble. You know what? I got to tell you, this is a wonderful person. Because I know she really struggled because she was often under attack, and all of the people on her team were under attack. But she carried on, and she did it for the right reason. It's out there. And I think Bonnie, truly, I know you told me not to fluff you up. I know you did. And my wife is still telling me to get off the stage. Boy, that Barbara. But anyhow, she did do it. And so we're so grateful for what you've done, because we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you. Thank you, dear.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Who was in that car anyway yesterday? It just really cracked me up. Okay, hi back at you. It is a pleasure to be here. It's a very different experience from speaking to an academic audience. Nobody applauds you before you talk. But it's a pleasure to speak to you, because I think that we have one really big thing in common, all of us, and that is we have, everybody in this room, and myself included, saw a life transformed, and we couldn't walk away from it. And that, right? And that doesn't matter if Health Canada is telling you to be quiet, or in my case, to stop doing your research. You can't walk away from it. There have been other people who have seen lives transformed, and unfortunately they have walked away from it. And it's most of the psychiatrists that I've tried to work with, as a matter of fact. But they're coming along. And of course, present company excluded, right? Who, Dr. Ferry, who has been involved from the beginning, off and on. So I have quite a few slides to show you, and I think I should just jump in on them. If you want to make a note of my email address, if I talk too fast, don't hesitate to email me. I'll send you my slides. I'll send you any of the links that I go over. Or if you just want to have them, just, you know, I have to strip off the unpublished data, but then I always distribute my slides. Can I? Oh yeah, I can make them go forward from here, can't I? Let me try this. Right. Okay, it's customary in academic settings to start out with a disclosure slide. And in this setting, I think it's especially important that I make this clear to you. I'm a professor in a faculty of medicine at the University of Calgary. I'm a PhD researcher in psychology, and I've always had an interest in nutrition. And I've also watched in my lifetime the corruption of the psychiatric literature by pharmaceutical companies, and it's very depressing. And so when I became involved with Tony and David, and that's a long story we aren't going to go into here, and when they formed a company later called True Hope, somehow it was clear to me from the beginning that I would never be asking them for funding, and I would never let them buy me a cup of tea, basically. And so my appearance today is actually a deviation from that, although I've arranged it so that I'm not receiving any pay or honorarium for the time that I've spent coming down here preparing the talk. But the Q people are covering my airfare and my hotel. And I have to find out if in the future my disclosure slide has to be worded a little differently. But up till now, I've had no commercial tie to any company. First of all, it's easy to be self-righteous when you have a good salary, and I'm a professor at a university, I have a good salary. But also, all the other people who've been studying the formulas that have come out of Alberta, all of them have decided to follow the same tack. And so it's important that you know that the nutritional research I'm going to be talking to you about today is not corrupted by any kind of bias of funding. The company does provide free formula and placebo, but that's not unusual in any kind of setting. But they do not control research. They don't fund the research. We don't ask them to fund the research, okay? Yeah. It was an easy decision to make when we saw our very first pilot data, and we saw the impact that we were having on people, and we knew that no one would believe our data because it's head and shoulders more effective than medication. Unless we could say we had no conflict of interest. And yet to this day, we have reviewers say, really? Right? You're hiding something. I mean, they don't believe it. That's kind of interesting in itself. There's a disclaimer on here because as a research psychologist, I feel it's important to remind all of us, we know this, but it's not as if nutrition is the only answer to everything. It's very important. If we really want to fix mental health problems, we should get rid of war and poverty. That would solve a huge chunk, right? Yeah. Let me know if you figure out how to do it. But by the way, war and poverty have an indirect impact also through the nutrition line, because when people can't cook in their kitchens, etc., they don't eat as well. Also, though, there are many people who've been abused as children, neglected as children. There are other causes of mental challenges, and we have to keep that in mind. So here's an overview of what I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to summarize 3 types of research linking nutrition to mental health, because I want you to have a bigger context than just pill form. Secondly, I'm going to present some naturalistic data, some of which is published and some is not, but it's my commitment partly to the True Hope people that I'm going to get this published before I retire. So you'll get to see it here. Third, policy implications and a take-home message. Let's start with the first one. Oh, no, sorry. I'm going to probably be saying sorry a lot. I don't have that peekaboo system here where I get to see the next slide, and so until it appears on the screen, and then I remember, oh yeah, I was going to say this next. Sorry. So you'll hear that more than once. If this isn't enough information for you, and if I haven't put you to sleep, I want you to go to madinamericacontinuinged.org, and again, I'll send you my slides or email me if you don't write it down completely. There are 3 lectures there that were just posted this past month, a few weeks ago, in the area of nutrition and mental health. I do 45 minutes on history. Today I'm doing one study on history, and it kills me. I love talking about 2,600 years of history relating nutrition to mental health. The older I get, the more interested I am in that. Secondly, I do a 45-minute lecture on population health data, and I will be giving you a couple samples today. And then Dr. Julia Ruckledge gives part 3, which is a review of the treatment studies using micronutrients in pill form. And as Tony just said, there are about 30 of them on EMPowerplus Q96. I'll probably usually use the word EMPowerplus. There will be, Julia Ruckledge, in case you don't know, is a Canadian who I had the honor of supervising her master's and PhD at University of Calgary, and then she went to University of Canterbury and Christchurch, New Zealand, and she now has the most active research program in the world on EMPowerplus, okay? We're hoping to have a part 4 filmed by maybe the end of the summer or early fall, and that's with Dr. Charlie Popper, who's at Harvard Medical School and McLean Hospital in Boston, on the biologic rationale. The continuing ed people have to raise the money each one of these costs about $2,000, and they've just kind of run out of money. But hopefully we'll be able to get his part 4 up there too. Now, how many of you know about Mad in America? Oh, you need to know about Mad in America, my goodness. They're on our side, guys. The Mad in America people, led by Robert Whitaker, who wrote a book called Mad in America about, I've forgotten how many years ago, 8 years ago, really kind of blew the cover on the problems with psychiatric medications. And his website, madinamerica.com, not continuing ed, but madinamerica.com, is a forum for all kinds of research and blogs and commentary. And he's become a major figure. If you're going to read one of his books, I recommend a life-changing book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, the Epidemic of Mental Disorders, okay? He also has another recent one analyzing the field of psychiatry. The psychiatrists in the room really should read this little book called Psychiatry Under the Influence, written while he was at the Harvard University Ethics Institute with a psychologist named Lisa Cosgrove. However, you need to start looking at madinamerica.com because you'll just be amazed at how much data and research are coming out and people blogging about their experiences with medication. I think everyone in this room will resonate with it. And Bob is a worldwide figure now. I know he was invited to the UK this week and testified in front of the Parliament the day before yesterday. I mean, he's really having an impact on getting governments to look at the problems with psychiatric medication. That is not a totally anti-medication message, as usual. He always talks about selective use of medication, etc. Okay, I spent too long on that slide. I have to get on to my talk. This is part 1, and I think I'm already 10 minutes into this. Oh my goodness, only 5. All right. So I'm going to cover just 3 types of research linking nutrition to mental health. You probably thought you were only going to hear the 3rd one, the treatment stuff. But I want to talk about A and B here, or 1 and 2. Correlational and prospective, because I think you folks should know that you're part of a worldwide interest in nutrition that is backed by good science. So the first one is correlational. There are about a dozen nutritional epidemiology studies, none of them, not one, done in the United States, which I find really fascinating. There is one small one in Canada, but the really major ones are from Australia, Spain, the UK, and Japan. These studies are correlational, and each one has thousands of people. And they ask the question, is there any relationship between dietary pattern and the prevalence of psychiatric symptoms? And they all 12 in major journals found the same thing. They use different terminology, but basically they find that people who eat a Mediterranean-type diet, unprocessed food, you can see the other labels there, have lower rate of mood and anxiety symptoms, and people who eat the Western diet, which is sometimes called the standard American diet, get it? Sad diet, have a higher rate of mood and anxiety symptoms. And by the way, a study came out, I think about a month ago, showing that about 50% of the caloric intake of Americans nationwide is in that category, which is very, very scary. In Canada, there's a study showing that in teenagers, over 75% may well be in that category. I think I just misspoke. It was a slightly lower number, but at any rate, it's very concerning, and that's when we lose control of how they eat and so forth. So I just want to make sure you know what a Mediterranean diet looks like. I think you do. And you know this is not the Mediterranean diet. Okay. And you know, it's very sad if you look at the way people eat. It's very worrisome. And Tony spoke about that. Now, you should be saying to me, Dr. Kaplan, that proves nothing. Because we all know that when people feel depressed, they want their comfort food. And so probably the reason there's this correlation is that they're depressed, and so that's what they go and eat. And correlational data cannot prove causation. The press and even scientists now are getting very sloppy in interpreting correlational data in terms of causation. It really upsets me. But this data, all of those studies, cannot prove anything about causality. Fortunately, and it's more expensive to prove causality, fortunately, we have some data to show that there is causality in the direction that we think there is. And there are only a couple of studies, one from Spain and one from Australia that I'm most familiar with, but I picked out the one from Spain to show you. This is from a university where they've been studying and following since 1999, over 16,000 former students and professors. And the major purpose of this SUN study, as it's called, is to look at cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. Nutrition below the neck. I mean, everybody in the world accepts that nutrition is relevant below the neck. I don't know why we're having trouble getting above the neck into the public view. That's what we're working on. At any rate, they did recently, for the first time, publish data on mental health symptoms. Now, here's how they did it. So everyone in the study, and for this part of their study on mental health, they had about 9,000 people. everyone was asked how often you eat muffins, donuts, and croissants. And that was put together into a score called commercial baked goods. And then, how often do you eat hamburgers, sausage, and pizza? And that was summed to be fast foods. And then they put them together. So now I want you just to think about how often, just think about the last week. How many of you ate a muffin in the last week? I did. Okay, so not very many of you, okay? How many of you ate any pizza in the last week? A little more. Okay, so I am going to arbitrarily say that people from here over to there are the 1/3 who ate the highest amount of these 6 items in the last, say, month or 6 months. I can't remember what interval they use now. And then there's a third in the middle who ate a middle amount. And then there are the goody two-shoes people over there who in all this time have never touched any of these things because you're so busy eating your fruits and vegetables. So then they just monitored all of you good people for, on average, 6 years. And they just asked the question, since none of you had depression to begin with, that was screened out, how many of you were diagnosed with depression? And this is what they found. So the goody two-shoes people over there are the one that says lowest third on your left, okay? And that's arbitrarily set as 1. Then the people in the middle third, are in the middle here, and as you can see, there's really no difference in terms of the prevalence of depression in the middle third. But you folks are in trouble, okay? The people who ate the most in all of those categories had about a 50% increase in diagnosis of depression. I like this study for a couple reasons, one of which is I think it would be crazy to say, there are no evil foods, right? It's the overall way we eat. And what this shows is there are no evil foods. Go ahead and eat your muffin, your pizza, whatever, occasionally. It's not going to be the end of the world, and it's not going to end up in a diagnosis of depression necessarily. But the people who are over here need to be taught to eat better, because they certainly are at increased risk. And the Australian study showed pretty much the same thing with a different design. So do I want you to go home and say that Dr. Kaplan said muffins cause depression? No. You know the answer to that. But just that we're told to eat the rainbow, and this is the rainbow they mean. Don't get your colors over there. The other way to look at it is that if you're eating a reasonable amount of food every day, every single bite counts. And because a liter, or a quart for you Americans, of blood goes through your brain every single minute your heart is pumping. Did you know that? A whole quart of blood. Your brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body. The cardiologists say the heart is. They're probably a close tie. At any rate, it's very metabolically important. And so if it is sucking up all the oxygen and nutrients in a quart of blood every minute, think about what you had to eat in the last, since you've been awake today. That's what you're feeding your brain, and every bite matters. I want to show you a slide that I'm told is the only slide anybody ever remembers that I present, and is the most important slide. And I'm so thrilled it's now being used in the school systems in some schools in Alberta. So don't be put off by it. I'm going to explain it. It's very simple. About 15 years ago, and Tony and I remember this a little differently, but I think I figured it out, Tony. About 15 years ago, I couldn't stand this feeling that I was studying magic. I'm really a very, conventionally trained experimental person. And I didn't understand why we were seeing the effects that we were seeing. And so I had trained in neurophysiology and worked in that area for a while. And I went back, and I've always been interested in brain metabolism. And I went back and looked at some metabolic pathways, and I had my aha moment. So I made up a slide showing, at that time, a lot of the public didn't know dopamine. They didn't know different names of neurotransmitters, but most people knew what serotonin was. So I made up a slide. You can see, you can see the serotonin there. And I made sure that the slide included tryptophan because most people knew that word, and tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. And then I put in a whole bunch of the metabolic steps with a lot of words that you can't pronounce, and I put in the arrows, and the arrows are a metabolic step. What do I mean by a metabolic step? It means that some transformation has occurred. And the transformation always requires enzymes, and the competence of enzymes depend upon adequacy of cofactors or coenzymes. Cofactors include vitamins and minerals. So I went in and clicked on each of the arrows to see whether or not I could find places where the nutrients that were in EMPowerplus could be found in these basic metabolic steps. And one more thing, this is a tiny, tiny microscopic piece of what's going in your brain, and I think you know that. I defined it simply because it fit on one slide. And Tony, the slide that you've got, I think you took that and went back to the original source and you put a whole bunch of more steps in. We were comparing some slides yesterday, sorry. Okay, so clicking on the arrows, what happens? Well, turns out vitamin B6 is critical there, and there, and there. 4 places in this particular section of the brain, or not of the brain, but of metabolic pathway. Copper is essential there for those enzymes to work. Copper is essential there. Iron is essential there, and even trace minerals. So we have vitamins and minerals. Molybdenum, who most people haven't even heard about. That means that every minute of every day, we need to be getting those nutrients into our brains. Is that where we're going to find those nutrients? I don't think so. Now, very recently, I decided to do the same thing for the omega-3s because I get really upset on the omega-3 front. We all know we should be taking fish oil. Eat fish a couple times a week, take fish oil, do it for your brain and your heart. It's really a very good thing to do. But what about the vitamins and minerals? And I just never heard anybody talking about this. Now, this is a photograph. It might be a little harder to see, but I'll just explain it. It's not very difficult. This is a vertical line showing the metabolism of the omega-3s, and over here is the metabolism of omega-6s. And you can't see what I'm pointing at, can you? I wish I had a pointer on the computer. That's the 3s, and that's the 6s over here, okay? And in this case, the enzymes are in the middle, okay, over here. And what I've done is I just took this off the internet and I put in these little yellow arrows. Do you see them? Okay. I'm not going to do this with every slide, don't worry. It's going to take too long. Anyway, and then you can ask the same question. Okay, omega-3s, you've all heard of EPA and DHA. Well, take a look at the omega-3. Why am I pointing there? Omega-3, and you'll see that the end products are EPA and DHA down here. And omega-6s, you may have heard of AA or arachidonic acid, which is down there. So the question is it enough to be eating omega-3s? Well, that's a good thing to do. But a lot of the omega-3s you're exposed to in fish and in plants are up here at linolenic and linoleic acid, which are confusing words up at the top. So don't they give you enough EPA and DHA? Well, they do if you have enough vitamins and minerals on board. So now take a look at the little yellow arrows that I have here. And just as an example, the top one, I'm pointing in the wrong place again, okay, up here. In order for delta-6 desaturase, which is an enzyme, to work most efficiently, you need vitamin C, B3, B6, magnesium, and zinc. And you can go through and look at all the yellow arrows that I've put in there, and you'll see a slew of vitamins and minerals. So again, even to maximize your use of the omega-3s, you really need to have vitamins and minerals on board. This helped convince me I wasn't studying magic, which was very important to me. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time talking about mechanisms, though the first one of those graphs is being shown in the schools to help kids make better food choices so that they have a visual image and they think about when they're eating what those pathways need. So I'm delighted that's being done. I'm not talking more about the mechanisms, and I know you're going to hear some more today about microbiome, gut dysbiosis, inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial function. If you're interested, this article that my colleagues and I published last year is written so that you can skip over a lot of the biochemical names and still get kind of the gist of how they're all related. I need to move on to what you thought I was going to talk about, which was treatment. So what can we say about that? Well, the obvious solution first to all the problems we've been identifying is to get people to eat better. And I personally feel that's very important. We cannot put 7 billion people on Q96. We're never going to reach a point where all the people in the world are taking pills. So as important as I think this research is on pills, I think it's important that we devote our time also to getting people to eat better. Thank you. And that means that we need to support school food programs. We need to support ways to provide food to people who are below the poverty level. It's worth it for our society to do that. So, what's the current evidence? But first of all, I mean, getting rid of a third of depression, let's do that first, right? So what's the current evidence for taking nutrients in pill form? I'm not going to go back in history, but my colleagues and I did publish a paper in 2007 evaluating all the research up to the year 2000 and showed that there actually was a lot of data that was being ignored. No surprise there, nobody wanted to hear about it. But there was moderate evidence in single nutrient studies for iron, copper, zinc, vitamins, a bunch of the B vitamins, D, E, and a folate, a B vitamin. But of course, better clinical efficacy even by 2007 when people used multi-ingredient treatments. Now there's one little thing I want you to know. There's a real hot topic in this field right now that I have very mixed feelings about. And that is there are people who are using single nutrients to boost the effect of medications. So Iris Bell was the first one to report in 1992 that tricyclic antidepressants were more effective in people who were given B-complex. The Harvard Mental Health Letter in 2008 reviewed folic acid, SAMe, and omega-3s and said they all boost the response to psychiatric medications, and this just came out a couple weeks ago. Jerome Saris from Australia in the American Journal of Psychiatry found mostly positive results of boosting the effect of psychiatric meds if you give your patients SAMe, methylfolate, omega-3s, and vitamin D. Medication enhancers. Some of us are not so interested in enhancing medication. We're more interested in, I guess you could look at it that way, that certainly with EMPowerplus, people can decrease their meds, but I think we're more interested in the framework of thinking about how to correct brain function. Someone gave me this Buckminster Fuller quote very recently. I'm trying to remember if I got it off Facebook. It might have been from one of you. I don't remember. A bunch of you follow me, I know. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I think that's what we're doing, okay? So here's how I'm going to review the evidence. I'm not going to go over 30 studies. By then you would definitely be asleep. You certainly can go look at the internet webinars. I thought what I'd do is look at, Julia Ruckledge and I usually use this kind of levels of evidence approach, and I thought I'd give you a sample of each, okay? Now, case studies, that's the lowest level. I'm not actually going to start there because I'm going to give you some case studies later to make a different point. We're going to start with case series. Case series, and Dr. Ferry, I just want you to know that I'd put this slide into the slide deck before I knew you were coming today, but it shows how long we've known each other, okay? This was the first case series that was presented at the Canadian Psychiatric Association meeting in December of 2000, which resulted in the press coverage, which resulted in the phone call from Health Canada to Tony, which resulted in Health Canada shutting down my research, but we published what we could. And this was an open label case series. Open label means there's no placebo control. It was simply the first 11 patients who we could collect in Calgary and with Dr. Ferry. I don't remember how many of these were yours anymore. You don't remember either, right? Doesn't matter, okay. And they took the broad, you'll see on many of my slides, I don't use brand names because that's not done in academic settings, but you know it's EMPowerplus, unselected sample, and this is the kind of result we got. Now even open label, this is pretty profound. If it were a medication, it would be quite noticeable. This is the measure of depression. The second one is the measure of mania, and the third one is an overall measure of psychiatric function. And that went from pre-intervention to post-intervention, and we analyzed the decrease in medications that people were able to get by on less medication. No surprise there. I'm going to give you one more case series with reversals. We published one with reversals back in 2002 or 2004, but this one just came out, and I thought you'd find this interesting. This is Heather Gordon, who's a PhD student with Julia Ruckledge at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. And what you can see here, the yellow is baseline, and this is a measure of ADHD symptoms in a group of school-aged children. And what you can see, because they're above that horizontal line, do you see the horizontal line going across? That's above a clinical cutoff. You can see they are way above. In fact, if someone were that far above, Julia uses an analogy in terms of height, it's kind of like they'd be a foot taller than average. It's a significant amount in terms of number of standard deviations. So it's 2.5. So then they were put onto EMPowerplus, and the effect size is a very large statistical effect size. That's the first green bar. Then they were taken off, and they were supposed to be off for 4 weeks, and many of them were off for only 2 weeks because parents were banging on the doors saying, please. Yeah, you see, you get it. You laughed before I even said it. I mean, most audiences don't get that. But please put my child back on that stuff, okay? And so that ranged from 2 to 4 weeks, and then, you know, you can see they went on again and then off again. And one of the interesting things is that we do build up bodily stores of nutrients. And so do you see that the red bars kind of went down? They don't, people don't get bad as fast if they are more well-nourished. And this is what we've seen anecdotally over time too. If someone has been on EMPowerplus for a long time and they stop taking it for whatever reason, they don't end up with a lot of symptoms right away. It takes longer than if they have just been on a short time. Makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move on to some larger case series, which are the database analyses that True Hope enabled us to do. So I've made one slide for 2 publications. One is with adults, 350 adults who reported diagnoses of bipolar disorder, and the other is 120 children and adolescents with bipolar disorder. They had all been taking EMPowerplus, and Dermot Gately and I published the first one, and then Julia Ruckledge joined us for the second one, and so you can see the citations there, although I left out the journals, sorry. I can give you references for any of these things. Let me tell you how to interpret this. Just look at the first 2 data points first. Okay, so from baseline to 3 months. If you look from baseline to 3 months, what you see is that on average, the median 50th percentile, they improve by 50%. That's enormous. You don't get that with any of the publications with antidepressants or etc. So very large change. And that was interesting, and you can see there's a range though, and some people improve more than others, and we did what are called multiple regression analyses to ask why some people improve more than others, and I can tell you about that. But the most important part of this slide was we had not yet had the money. Nobody had been able to do a placebo-controlled trial because they're very expensive. And so the important thing is, look what happened at 6 months. They did not regress. And years ago, I used to, whenever I was speaking to psychiatrists, I would always say, okay, we all know there's a placebo effect. You're going to tell me this is just placebo effect. Bipolar disorder waxes and wanes, so they got better. But how long do you think a placebo effect can last? And most psychiatrists, anybody here want to guess? I mean, how long can you feel better because you want so much to feel better if you have bipolar disorder? 3 days. I sometimes got quotes as long as 2 weeks, 3 weeks. At any rate, no one would believe that this would be a placebo effect at 6 months. So the fact that it was sustained at 6 months was very important. So let's go on to case controls. Now, we've only done one case control study, and I'm not going to go over it in detail, but I want to show you the results to make a different point. But this was Dr. Louis Mehl-Madrona, a psychiatrist in the States, who had been treating a lot of people on the autism spectrum with whatever the family chose, either micronutrients or medications. And at a certain point, he contacted me and said, Bonnie, I think I have a lot of people who've been taking EMPowerplus. Can we analyze the data? And he has a PhD also. He's very scientifically well-trained. And so he was tuned into this. So I helped him write it up, but this was all of his data. He had 44 on the spectrum who had taken micronutrients. So then we had a research assistant who would not be biased, who didn't know the people, go and match each one of those 44 with a person in his files who he had treated with medication, matched for age and sex, and severity of symptoms, okay? And then we just asked the question whether or not there was a difference, and there really was. And first of all, what you can see in the slide overall is that Dr. Mehl-Madrona made everybody get better, which is great. This is the micronutrient group, and that's the medication group. So on your left are the micronutrients, and right is medication. And the other thing that's really interesting, and I'm not going to belabor it, but the symptoms that got better were ones that get better in bipolar disorder, that get better in depression, that get better in ADHD, because the symptoms, go across these categories that are made by committees. And the symptoms that consistently get better the most easily are explosive rage, irritability, that kind of thing, hyperactivity, so forth. So what I wanted to show you today, though, we had really good data on adverse events. And this is so important. I mean, some of you are parents, you know what it's like when your child is vomiting or drowsy or drugged out or whatever. Look at the difference. The bright blue are the ones that are statistically significant. But if you just look at the bottom, you'll see overall, the micronutrient group had 33 adverse events. The medication group had about six times that many. So yes, they had good symptom relief for many of them, but at what cost? The last category is, of course, to some people the most important, but not to me, and I want to tell you why. What are randomized controlled trials? Well, it's one important methodology, but please, don't buy this bill of goods that they are the gold standard of all science. They are not. They are the gold standard of marketability. And that's because in about 1962, the FDA said you have to do RCTs, placebo-controlled RCTs, if you want to get approval to market your drug. Prior to that time, there was a lot of interest in all kinds of other methodologies, some of which I've been showing you here. And we've written a paper that gets cited a lot, but I'm not sure we've changed the world with it, in which some of you will know the third author there, Scott Shannon, evaluating treatments in healthcare, the instability of a one-legged stool. And what we address is that we are overly reliant on RCTs in healthcare, and that in fact we are cheapening our data. We're really, unfortunately, losing a wealth of information. Or as one of my friends once said, in a placebo-controlled RCT, you hardly ever generate new knowledge, which is true. What you're doing is trying to determine effect size to prove that it's marketable. And if you're a drug company, you're distorting the results if you've read the information on Paxil, etc. So that's another story. Okay, back to nutrition. I decided I was not going to talk about medication today. I am not an anti-medication person either. I am all in favor of use of medication in crises as the supplement. That's why you won't hear me call EMPowerplus a supplement very often. I say that's a primary treatment. Medication, that's my worldview, is that medication is the supplement. So what about nutrition and mental health? There are over 25 positive RCTs to date. Only a few of them are with EMPowerplus, but I thought you should know that there's this other research going on. I can't cover all of it for you, but I'm going to mention a few things. In the area of forensics, There have been 5 RCTs, and all of them show benefit for reducing aggression, violent acts, rule infractions. Same thing that we do with bipolar disorder, you know, same thing with irritability and depression. And I'm just going to show you, I often show this one because I think it should have a bigger impact. I just this week read an article, it was in the New Yorker, I don't know if anybody reads that, about a prison in Florida, which of course, you know, what is it, 2/3 or more of the the inmates are mentally ill. And they are punished by withholding food. Yeah, and I mean, mealtime comes and the tray, if they're in solitary confinement, the tray that comes through the door for them is an empty tray. And we have to really think twice about what our purpose is for imprisonment. If you want to improve a person's ability to improve and adjust and lead a life again, we should be giving them extra nutrition. And that's what Bernard Guest showed. He's at Oxford University, and this was published back in 2002. I understand he has another study that is imminently going to be published, but I don't know exactly where or what. And in this case, they had a bunch of young offenders. It was placebo and controlled. Their formula had about 26 ingredients, vitamins and minerals, and a tiny bit of EPA and the omega-3s. This is my graph of their data, and what it shows on the left is that before supplementation, they were very well matched in terms of aggression and violent acts, and during I'm using the word supplementation because they did here. During supplementation, the group that got the active had about 1/3 fewer of aggressive acts. And of course, the green bar shows you the placebo effect. Basically, it's 6.7%. And it's very important to have replication in science. This was replicated in Holland. We have somebody from Holland here, right? I think I heard that. Opsalberg, I don't know remember what university he's at. Published in aggressive behavior, a similar study and very similar results, and using a very similar formula. Why aren't our prisons? I mean, it would be the cheapest public health intervention you can think of. First of all, improving the food. I've heard that prisons brag about feeding inmates for less than $8 a day. And then why aren't they improving the food and providing micronutrients? It is a no-brainer to me, but getting the world to change is hard. Anyway, let's move on to stress and natural disasters. I'm going to skip over this very lightly, but it's all published, and also I have a 12-minute video on just this segment on my YouTube channel, which I'll give you the link for if you're interested. Julia Ruckledge was in the midst of doing trials of EMPowerplus in New Zealand when the horrible earthquake of September 2010 hit. Now, Christchurch had not had earthquakes in recent history, and it was devastating. And after she had made sure her family was okay, she tried to put her research program back together. And what she did, each red dot is an earthquake then for the next 5 months. There were about 8,000 of them. We call them aftershocks, but they're earthquakes. And what she did was she tried to locate people who had been in her trials. She successfully located about 15 people who just by chance were taking EMPowerplus at the time of the September earthquake. And she found about 15 people who just by chance had been on it before, but were finished with that phase of the study and were not taking it. Well, what a great opportunity. This is called making lemonade out of lemons, without a doubt. She did a study. She quickly, by phone, with her research assistants, got these people to report on how they were doing, analyzed the data, and published it, and showed that the people who were taking micronutrients were much more resilient, had less depression, anxiety, and stress. I didn't make a slide for that. I want to show you the second study. Along came the second really major earthquake in February of 2011. This devastated 1/3 of downtown Christchurch. It killed almost 200 people. It liquefied the earth. It was way worse. And it occurred in a population already highly, highly stressed. So now what Julia did, in tents on the lawn, because you couldn't go into the buildings at the university, there were cracks and everything at the time in many buildings. What they did was they appealed to the public of Christchurch Not people with diagnoses of anything, but just the public at large through social media, because the first thing you're going to do after an earthquake is get your internet up, right? I mean, everybody would. So, and they identified about 90 people who were willing to try nutrient treatment and to monitor their data by internet. And then, so the important thing is this is now a randomized trial with a control group that was just tracked. So, I'm sorry, I should have simplified this slide. What they had was about 30 were randomized to get B complex. About 30 were randomized to get EMPowerplus at a low dose of 4 a day. And I'm using EMPowerplus historically, not the EMPowerplus Advanced. But anyway, you know that because of the years. And that's important to remember in terms of dose. And then about a third got the higher dose of 8 a day. And the other details are there. The other interesting thing she did is they evaluated people for PTSD. Okay, there's a measure that's used for that. And what they showed was that all 3 groups got better compared to the group that they were just tracking that didn't get randomized to anything. That was a little bit of a surprise, but not too big, because it turns out, I don't have time to cover it now, but there are about 8 clinical trials on the use of B complex for stress in basically non-psychiatric samples. So the use of B complex for stress is really pretty well supported. You should know that. So they did very well. The EMPowerplus people did better in terms of some of the stronger intrusive thoughts. And at 1 month follow-up, all of them did better in terms of PTSD. And I'm going to draw your attention to the left-hand side. This is the measure of PTSD. There are other studies that show at least 50% of a population that goes through this kind of event will meet criteria for PTSD. You don't have to go to war to suffer PTSD. They had 65%, that's the bar on the left, and 1 month later, on any of the nutrient formulas, it was only 19%, okay? That information needs to get out to our military and a lot of other people. The controls got better, but not nearly as much, as you can see. Now, along came the flood in southern Alberta, which you may or may not have heard of, in June of 2013. And Julia called me up and said, Bonnie, you've got to go to your mayor and have him hand out nutrients. Well, yeah, I laughed too. I mean, I knew I wouldn't be believed. And so instead we mounted a third study, because replication in another setting is very important. And so we did a study where we decided, Julie and I worked together on this with our students. We decided to compare a single nutrient. We weren't comfortable using a placebo. Can you imagine being in an earthquake or a flood or a forest fire and someone saying, would you join a study where there's a 1/3 chance you'll get a placebo? You know, your life is too chaotic. But we could legitimately say, you know, you will get one of these 3 formulas, and by the way, there's reason to believe that any of them might help you somewhat. We don't know if any will help more than any other, and we didn't know. So the single nutrient was 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. The few nutrients was B complex, and the broad spectrum was, of course, EMPowerplus. And yeah, I do have a slide on this. So what was interesting was, in this population, not 5,000 earthquakes, but a single flood. That's an important difference, right? And with a total outpouring of our communities, we were all out there, you know, digging mud, etc., in our rubber boots. Vitamin D did not do as well, that's the blue line, but no difference between B complex and broad spectrum formula, which was EMPowerplus. So it's important to know, again, B complex in a lot of crisis situations like that can do a whole lot of good, which I'm trying to tell our government right now. I forgot, I have this slide. We already knew this in animals. That's the point of that slide. But now, as you may know, we're having major forest fires in Alberta. We have over 90,000 people who have been evacuated. We have a few thousand in Calgary, many more in Edmonton. And so I have emailed, I have tweeted, I have done everything that I can to try to get the attention of our government to hand out, if nothing more, B complex, and some people should have more than that, right? I've been on breakfast TV. It's only been a week and a day since I started beating the bushes, but I'm not getting any response. It's very hard to get their attention unless you're doing something they don't like. Right? As Tony told you. Okay, ADHD, I have to tell you about this. There are 2 RCTs, and of course the one on EMPowerplus is by Julia Ruckledge, and that was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry. These were adults with ADHD, and they did 1-year follow-up published in the Journal of Attention Disorders, and I just have one slide to show you on it. It's in the Internet Talks if you want to know more. And what this shows in blue is the people who got the active formula, and in red, the placebo. And in this case, you have to read it as when the graph goes up, it means it's more improvement. Moderate effect sizes, the 0.47 and 0.62, that means not quite what you get with open label, but very, very solid. And she had a lot of other variables. I just wanted to show you her 1-year follow-up because it's really interesting. So at the end of follow-up, take a look at just the last data point here, okay? The people in yellow stayed on micronutrients, and they really were doing well a year later. They're still at a very low level for their symptoms. But the people who switched to medications, which is blue, or never took medications or micronutrients, which is red, looked the same. In other words, the people who switched to medication look like the people who weren't taking anything. And I can't tell you how often I talk to people where they say, I'm taking medication X, but I don't think it's doing anything for me. And I feel like saying, yeah, I see heads nodding. Why are you taking it? But I know people we're well trained to think if you take a pill, that's going to help you. In mood, there are very few good trials on samples specifically recruited for depression, but I wanted to show you in that same trial of Julia's with adults with ADHD, about 1/4 of the sample met criteria for major depressive disorder. So she pulled them out and analyzed them separately and asked the question, did their mood get better? And this is showing you the active treatment group improved very significantly, much more than the people on placebo. And the MADRS is a measure of depression. That effect size of 0.64 is very impressive. So we need to do placebo-controlled trials of depression for sure. All of that was part 1 of my talk. But I'm not going to talk much longer, believe it or not. So I'm going to end by talking about policy implications, and I'm going to talk about money. Fair warning. I've already mentioned we need to all of us support nutrition education. We need to get everybody cooking again. If you have university-age kids, a woman who's a student at Northwestern University who was appalled at seeing all of her friends eating ramen noodles and craft dinners started spoonuniversity.com, where they share ideas for inexpensive, quick, healthy ways of eating. And supplementation for those at risk. We really should be doing something about the prisons. I've spoken to the Alberta Bar Association, and after I walk out of the room, I'm sure nothing ever happens. And we need to feed the poor. I don't care what your politics are. Most people who are poor don't want to be poor, and that's 100% of the children. And we need to feed those developing brains. It's a choice. Now I'm going to tell you about Andrew, and I'm going to talk about money. This case study is published, and I always put it near the end of my talk because, not because of the effect it had on him, but because of the social implications, the policy implications. So Andrew was a middle child of 3 in an intact family in Calgary. His 2 brothers, older and younger, ate the same way he did. They were fine. Long story about Andrew, but he ended up very ill with auditory hallucinations, paranoid ideation, OCD, etc., and really psychosis. He was admitted to Alberta Children's Hospital, where I worked as an inpatient in the mental health unit. I didn't know the family then. I wasn't involved with inpatients. He had every investigation imaginable because it is a tertiary referral center, and they don't lack for sophistication. They thought he was described to me as the sickest child they'd ever seen. on the mental health unit in terms of psychosis, and they just thought there had to be some reason. They looked at pandas and all kinds of things. Nothing came out. He had delusions. He thought his food was being poisoned, and his mother describes holding a spoon with food in front of him, trying to get it near his mouth, and he had to be reassured about 1,000 times. He kept saying, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, is it poisoned? Is it poisoned? Is it poisoned?" And he was losing weight. No surprise there. He was convinced at the age of 10, and then he turned 11 while he was there, that he had killed someone and that he had committed adultery, and I don't think an 11-year-old even knows what that means, but it caused extreme guilt, and so he had to pray obsessively, and that's why he had this OCD diagnosis. He had stuttering and tremors, but some of that might have been medication-induced. He was there for 6 months. When he entered our inpatients, he had an overall score of 35 out of 100, which is very low for ability to function on a scale called the Children's Global Assessment Scale. At 6 months, they sent him home. They had put him through every medication trial they could think of. They sent him home, and his CGAS was still 35. His mother, who's an engineer, quit her work to be at home with him, and they went to outpatient care where they saw Dr. Megan Rodway. His parents, meanwhile, had heard about True Hope. This is Alberta. So most people who hear about True Hope hear bad things about True Hope, but fortunately some still find the website and talk to other people. That was a very bad joke about how there's harassment still going on. Sorry if it sounded rude, I was trying to be funny. At any rate, I was not there, but Dr. Rodway apparently, when the parents brought it to them, apparently said, "This is snake oil, but I don't have anything better to offer." So she was humble, and they went on the formula, and I was asked, the True Hope people actually collected the data, and I was asked to help out and write it out. If we have a minute, I'll tell you later what happened to Dr. Rodway. That's another interesting story. This is his daily OCD score from September 2008 until the spring of 2009. Here's his daily psychosis score. And then at some point he said, "I understand what you're doing," because he was getting better. He said, "I can score my hallucinations," because no one else could score that, for him. And this is, the blue line is visual hallucinations, and red is auditory hallucinations. And long story short, Andrew is, and not his real name, Andrew is now well, and he graduated high school in May of 2015. And by the way, the day before his high school graduation, I was presenting this to the American Psychiatric Association in a symposium. And before I got to the point of this story, which you haven't heard yet, it's my next slide, I said this, and I said, by the way, he's graduating tomorrow morning, which was true, and I would have been there if I weren't standing here talking to you. And this audience of 75 psychiatrists burst into applause. And I was shocked. I mean, you people applaud, but academic audiences don't applaud like that. And later, what I figured out is that these were psychiatrists who do not see people with childhood schizophrenia or childhood psychosis graduate from high school. They just don't have that experience. Isn't that a sad comment? It was quite startling. Now, here's the point of the case. Yes, it's a wonderful case. It was published in British Medical Journal Case Reports, and he's doing fine, and we're Facebook buddies now. By the way, he got his grade 5 driver's license this week. He just informed me. So he's looking at he's employed part-time, and he obviously wants to do a driving job. So here's the point. We had a health economist with our single-user payer system in Canada. You might have heard about that. We're able to pull out data on healthcare costs more readily than you can. Even so, this is an underestimate of what it cost for 6 months inpatient. This is the very next 6 months. The very next 6 months is an outpatient, covering his outpatient costs and EMPowerplus. But what's the difference here? This tall pile of dollar bills is coming out of my pocket as a taxpayer, right? And this is coming out of the parent's pocket because there's no coverage for micronutrients. And that's one of the things we have to change. And policy people who are so worried about the healthcare costs all over the place and this escalating costs of treating mental health need to know about this kind of thing. We actually have a second case also through True Hope, which I've just acquired the data on, and I'm hoping to publish that, but I didn't have time to make sense of it for you today. Where do we go from here? We need more proof. It might sound, I know that some of you are sitting there thinking, wow, look at all this data. But to a standard scientific audience or governments that we're trying to influence, they see one RCT and a clinical sample with EMPowerplus, and that's Julia's ADHD trial. And then the 3 trials, which are not placebo-controlled, but they're randomized trials in post-disaster. That's all they see. They don't put any weight on any of the other evidence or any of your experiences, and that's the cold, hard truth. We must have more science because, and I'll tell you why I believe that in a minute, we need more young scientists studying this. When my research was shut down, I had to turn my students onto other projects because they had to get degrees. Julia Ruckledge is now very much under attack in New Zealand, and she's not sure how many of her students should be moved onto other projects. It's very worrisome. And we need knowledge translation, which is just jargon for saying we've got to get the policymakers to pay attention. We all know that. This is what I'm doing because I'm no longer starting clinical trials. You might not have noticed, I have gray hair, an awful lot of it. And so although I'm still very active, I am not starting any more trials. So in June of 2015, I established a donor-directed fund, a charitable fund, which is managed by a wonderful foundation, which the existence of which was stimulated by Bob Whitaker and the Mad in America people. And they are part of the recovery movement. They are dedicated to the reality that people can recover from mental disorders. That's their mission. And my mission has been to educate them on the importance of nutrition for that. Their focus has been psychotherapy and all the other wonderful things that are important. But they're a great group. They're located just south of Portland. This money is not for me that I'm trying to raise money for. You have to understand that I'll never get a dime of this. I'm raising money for my junior colleagues like Julia Ruckledge and other people. And so far, people donating money to this fund have raised, this is American, it's a, what is that called, a 501c3, thank you. Right, so people get charitable donations. Individual people have, just since June, helped us raise $17,000. And that's through wonderful, forget the 100,000 for a minute. I didn't misread it. $17,000, which is people giving, some of the people are in this room, donating $20, $50, $500 from many people, $1,000 from some very generous people. And so that $17,000 is very precious to me. Very recently, a donor came out of the blue and gave us $100,000. Yeah. It's already gone. That particular chunk of money went to a particular project that we're excited about, and it has been spent. So the fund is back down to $17,000, but I'm sure we'll grow it again. And so the $20, the $50, the $500, and the thousands are still very important there. In Canada, in August, I set up one for Canadians, and it's managed by the Calgary Foundation. And again, we don't have the term 501c3, but it's tax deductible, and it has come to $8,000. We haven't had a major donor there yet, but it's growing. Why am I doing this? Okay, NIH, National Institutes of Health, and other government funding groups will not fund studies of more than one nutrient at a time. There have been at least 4 rejections of clinical trials by NIH and other federal governments, probably more like 5 or 6, where the feedback is, yes, we'd like you to do this trial, but would you just pick one nutrient? And it just makes me so angry because these are scientists who should know something about brain metabolism. But I do understand the thinking that you only should study one variable at a time. I was trained in that too. We call it the scientific method, but it's not accurate for the way the brain works. And also, we need to raise the money because the harassment continues, obviously especially targeted at the Stephan family, but it's escalating now in New Zealand. And if you want to help Julia Ruckledge out, follow her on Facebook. She has a couple of petitions going. The New Zealand government, which many wings of which think she's like the next best thing to sliced bread, and they're right, okay, are, many of them are very supportive of her, but other branches like the equivalent of the FDA are really giving her a hard time. And so there are petitions, because when the government understands that what is going on in this little tiny country where, you know, sheep outnumber people by something like 30 times or something. How many of you been to New Zealand? It's very small, right? A wonderful country. But when they understand that what the Routledge Laboratory is doing has an impact worldwide, we're hoping it will help sway some opinions. So you can follow her on Facebook for that. But the best hope, I think now, and I just made up this slide this week. I've never in my life had a slide like this in front of an audience, and I hope it's not too gauche. I just thought I should tell you what I think is the best way forward. If we have two groups in the US that keep getting rejected, that are really excellent scientists, and they need money to do this work. They want to do the work, and they have RCTs, both of them right now on ADHD, but also interested in depression, etc. And so I asked them for rough budget numbers, like what am I fundraising for? And so one group estimates needing about $112,000, this is in US dollars, over 2 years. The other group about $80,000, so that's about $200,000. We have to find a lot of big donors or a zillion little donors. There's also one person that needs a salary, which would be $60,000 for each of 2 years. There, you know, my fondest dream is somebody would magically find a way for us to get $500,000, because that would keep things going for at least the next 3 years. But we'll take it a bit at a time. All of this stuff can be funded in chunks. 17,000 is too low. We have to get it higher before we can proceed with anything, but it's very important. Why is it important? What do these characteristics sound like? Depression, you know what that is. Hysteria is an old term, probably kind of mania, anxiety, Rich, is that what you would say? How did they diagnose hysteria? Manic? Mania. Oh, dramatic, okay.
Yeah.
So,
high-flying feelings.
high-flying feelings, for those of you who didn't hear it. Irritability, self-harm, we call mutilation now, apathy, etc. All of this sounds like mental disorders, right? And some of you have experienced some of them. So look at this. Normal, healthy university students fed the equivalent probably of ramen noodles for 24 weeks, become mentally ill. And they knew it, we knew it, in 1950. This is University of Minnesota. These starvation experiments are best known for the physical effects. This was after World War II, the end of the Holocaust, the emptying out of the concentration camps, and a lot of interest in the physical effects of nutrient deprivation. But this was published also. And so we knew this before. And that to me means that what we know now about multi-nutrient treatment can still be lost, because this was lost. I don't feel at all secure, even though this popped up on my Facebook page yesterday. Any of you who looked at Facebook last night might have seen it. It's really kind of amazing. In Switzerland, the Interior Ministry has announced plans to give 5 complementary therapies the same status as conventional medicine. By May 2017, insurance will pay for their treatment. And isn't that amazing? So we don't have anyone from Switzerland here, I don't think, but I underlined holistic medicine, and I replied to the people who put it up and said, what will that be? Because, you know, is this the first step to covering nutrients? I don't know. But, you know, I'm going to end on a little bit more of a negative note. This is my last slide. We knew it in 1950 because the University of Minnesota studies. We knew the importance of nutrition, and we ignored it because of the pharmacology revolution. But you know what? We knew it again. In 1968, 1974, nobody less than Linus Pauling, Nobel Prize winning chemist, said the genes for mental illness are probably the ones that regulate brain metabolism of essential nutrients. And we think now he was right, but we lost it. This is not taught in schools. Nobody believes it. And so I stand before you less confident than many of you that a revolution is happening. Even though I know you see a lot of positive things, I don't think with a lot more research, unless there's a lot more research, I think that this can be lost again. So I hope you'll make sure it isn't. I think that's all I have to say, and I don't know if I'm allowed to ask for questions. Am I allowed to do that, David?
We're going to have a panel of questions during the working lunch.
Oh.
So we'll wrap up.
Okay, we don't eat at lunch, we talk. Okay, well, thank you.